Streaming platforms like Netflix and Disney+, restrictions due to the global pandemic, changes in our lifestyle, and advances in technology we have available in our homes have all changed the way we consume media. Nowadays, we are less likely to take 3 hours out of our day to go and watch a movie, and more likely to stream 2 movies at home or binge watch a complete series. This has created an interesting change in the entertainment industry. Now, films are released directly to streaming platforms or even created by and for that specific platform. Blockbuster movies have their own miniseries made, documentaries, comedy specials, animated series, and more different kinds of original content is being created, and a lot more money is being spent on all of it. And with more money, a production can afford to have a better director, better writers and actors, and of course, better VFX. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is a 6-episode miniseries that was released earlier this year. Tippett Studio, Industrial Light and Magic, Rodeo Effects, Cantina Creative, Crafty Apes, Sony Pictures Imageworks, Weta Digital, Trickster, Digital Frontier Effects, QPP, Stereo D, and Technicolor VFX provided over 2,500 VFX shots for the series, so it's not really surprising that the cost per episode rose as high as $25 million. The first episode in the series has a dramatic sequence where the Falcon flies through a canyon in Tunisia. Rather than go to a canyon and record drone footage for reference, the VFX team used satellite imagery and height maps of Paria Canyon and Death Valley to create a terrain model. The problem with using height maps is that the surfaces don't have any detail on the vertical plane, so the VFX team textured and shaded the canyon's walls to add the missing detail. However, although this stood up well for high to mid-altitude shots and for shots when the walls are just whizzing by, it wouldn't work for close-up work inside the canyon. To overcome this problem, the VFX team mapped where the virtual cameras needed to be to get the shots they wanted, and then they created a set of different columns of rocky parts, kind of like biscuits stacked on top of one another. They could then jam these columns together to give the walls the 3D details they needed for the close-up shots. For the live-action footage of the Falcon flying and the men in wingsuits gliding, the director decided to use GoPro-type action cameras. These cameras have a very wide-angle lens and gives a very in-your-face action feel. However, when they shot principal photography in front of blue screens, it was an overcast day and the light was rather dull. This meant that although the actor's face was always crisp and in focus, his body in the background wasn't. They solved this issue by creating a digi-double of the Falcon and aligning it perfectly to the live-action footage. In these shots, the Falcon's face is real, but his body is fully CG. By doing this, not only could they overcome the defocus problem, but they could also light their digital double exactly the same as their CG canyon, so it would sit perfectly within the shot. Since the Falcon's face was shot on an overcast day, it had to be digitally relit to sit correctly on its now fully CG body. They did this by rendering their correctly lit digi-double complete with its digital head. They then extracted the spec and the sense of key light. Key light is the primary source of light in the scene, in this case the sun. They then added this to the Falcon's face on the live action plate. The hardest shot in this scene was when the Falcon approaches the cockpit of the C-130 plane. Once again, principal photography was shot on an overcast and rainy day. A large wire rig flew the Falcon in towards the C-130, but the sequence required him to approach the plane from further away, so they had to do a digi-double handoff. The plane itself had to have the propellers substituted for moving CG ones. Raindrops had to be removed, reflections added to the glass, and the whole plane had to be removed from the background and also relit. Since the VFX team had to alter so much of the original plate and they already had to create a digital C-130 asset for one of the shots in the scene, they decided to use this one too. Only about 20% of the plane in this shot is from the original plate, the nose and the parts where the Falcon is touching it, or casting shadows onto it, and even that had to be digitally relit using the same method they did earlier. The truck fight scene in the series takes place in Germany, but the live-action plates were actually shot in Atlanta, and the reshoots were done in Prague. In this scene, a fight is happening on various fronts. Weapons are being thrown, people are flying about, driving from one truck to another, and jumping out of helicopters, and all whilst the two trucks speed down the highway. With this type of fast and frantic sequence, there is always a danger of overloading the audience, confusing them so that they don't know who is fighting or where they're fighting. To overcome this, the VFX team actually built an 8-kilometer long CG environment where the action would take place. This gave the scene a natural timeline. For example, halfway through the scene, the trucks would be halfway down the CG highway, and the background would be unique to that place along the 8-kilometer timeline. By anchoring all the action to the plates on this timeline, not only had the team created a solid path through the scene that the audience could follow, but they also created a way the editor could procedurally change the pace and timing of the scene without losing continuity or a sense of speed within the scene. For example, if the CG trucks ran at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour, the scene would last less than 4 minutes. If they went faster, the scene would be shorter. And no matter where they put the virtual cameras, if they switched position or went to a different plate, the CG background would never repeat itself. To create Madrid, the VFX team were given some artwork from Ray Chan and the art department, as well as reference material from the comics. However, this material was highly stylized and wouldn't really stand up in the real-world environment of the series, so the VFX team had to find a way to mimic the look of this iconic city and ground it in reality. They did this by referencing a different iconic city that actually exists, Hong Kong. The VFX team created a library of buildings to give Madrid its own architectural language. The main buildings were standalone, but the smaller ones were instanced, and the team had to change the top elements and light patterns to break up the repetition. One thing the team had to focus on was to contrast the difference between High Town, home to the rich and powerful, and Low Town, home to the slums and the dark criminal activities. They also had to highlight that Madrid is a pirate city full of fun and pirates, but at the same time seedy and dark. Finding the balance between the two was complicated. If they made it too dark, the city would look dull and abandoned, and if they made it too light, it would kind of look like Las Vegas. For the final fight sequences, the director needed to put cameras in places where you couldn't put a normal camera, and have them move in ways and at speeds that just weren't physically possible. In order to give the director the maximum flexibility with his shots, the VFX team had to create a digital photoreal New York City. Using detailed satellite reference and street maps, they created an accurate representation of New York City and its shorelines. They then used a proprietary system that accesses the building library and instances buildings accurately matching each building height and footprint to replace the original. To enhance their digital New York City, they added detailed rooftops, iconic bridges, watercraft and aircraft, street-level set dressing, traffic, and digital crowds. The street-level battle takes place next to a large construction pit in a street intersection in downtown New York. In order to give the filmmakers flexibility with their shots, the VFX team had to make a digital version of the entire location. Using photogrammetry and LiDAR coverage of the movie set and the surrounding locations, they created a photoreal copy of the construction pit and surrounding streets. This allowed the filmmakers to adjust the set to their cinematic needs. To capture the stunts, they could place a camera wherever they wished. They could expand the proportions of the set to increase perspective, and they could change the depth of the pit to heighten the sense of danger. So MCU superheroes seem to be paving the way to a future where a production for TV no longer means cheap and cheerful, where more and more big screen productions make small debuts, and where quality VFX are used much more widely. Not only has the MCU pushed the VFX industry to evolve, it has pushed the entire entertainment industry to do so also. The statement of pushing forwards and always striving for better is not only the mantra of any of the Marvel superheroes, but also of the company itself, and probably the reason why Marvel never ceases to marvel. Please give us a like if you enjoyed this video. Don't forget the links to the music used in this video are in the video description, and as always, please let us know in the comment section which movie VFX you'd like to see behind next.